Good morning, everyone. I am Jennifer Almeida, the Director of Education for the Massachusetts Restaurant Association Education Foundation, and I am so excited to welcome you guys to our probably the last webinar of the school year for our ProStart students, and we are so excited to end it with a bang. We are ending it with some pastries. Ooh, if only I could eat it all. But enough from me. I'm going to kick it right over to Jackie and get this started so we can watch some delicious pastries being made.
All right, well, thank you, Jen, and thank you to the Massachusetts Restaurant Association Ed Foundation and ProStart for partnering with us today. You asked for a closer look at pastry and ACF Listen. Welcome to ACF Chefs Forum, and we appreciate you joining us today for this exciting pastry skills presentation focusing on pâte à choux. Now, more than ever, and especially during this difficult year, it's important for culinarians to connect, to share, and to offer inspiration and mentorship, which is exactly why we're excited to have Chef Capper here with great information just for you, the leaders and future leaders of the food service industry. Before we begin, as a note, we'll be taking questions from you, the viewers, as we are able. Please use the chat function to collaborate with other viewers and the Q&A function to pose questions directly to our guest chef. So let's get the conversation going in the chat. Why don't you tell us what your favorite dessert is? I'm Jackie Pressinger, American Culinary Federation's Director of Strategic Partnerships, and I'm honored to introduce our guest chef today. Chef Natasha Capper has been executive pastry chef at the historic Piedmont Driving Club for over 20 years. Born in Zimbabwe, Chef immigrated to the USA with her family, where she went on to earn her degree in food service management from Johnson & Wales University. Through her career, she has held numerous positions such as the prestigious the Grove Park Inn, Renaissance Hotels, and the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company. She is an ACF certified executive pastry chef and an avid pastry competitor, winning numerous medals for her pastry work. Chef is one of Barry Callebaut's exclusive chocolate ambassadors, and we are so honored to have her join us today as a featured ACF chef presenter. So thank you for sharing your passion and skills. And at this point, I'll pass the presentation over to you, Chef Capper.
Wonderful, Jackie. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of you who are tuning in. I look forward to showing you a little bit about pâte à choux. This is one of the most versatile batters we do in the bake shop. It has savory applications, pastry applications, and it's a fascinating amount of food science. So hopefully, even those of you who have made pâte à choux many times before, it also goes by the name of éclair paste or choux paste. We'll maybe pick up some little tidbits. You're going to get some recipes tomorrow. And with those recipes, you're going to see some substitutions that are available. I'll mention some of that while I'm going through this. And please, if you have questions, do put them in the Q&A. What'll happen is, as I finish sort of each step in the process, I'm going to ask Jackie. She's going to let me know what questions have come in, and we'll try to get those answered. Anyhow, thank you for joining me. I like to start every day with being grateful for something, and I want to share that with you. Today, I'm extremely grateful for the fact that we have a beautiful day here in Georgia, and my 3 furry sous chefs are not here to help. So the bird, we have a parrot. I can't promise that she will not chime in at some point, but anyway, her narrations are usually somewhat entertaining. But with that, let's get started. So what I have here is I have a pot of water. One of the substitutions that you will see in the recipe is going to be, you can do this with water, you can do this with milk, or you can do it with a combination of both. And to this, we're going to add some salt. A lot of recipes also add sugar. It's optional. It is there for flavor. Recipes using a little bit of sugar tend to bake up maybe a little bit darker. But one of the reasons I don't care to use it is because when we are doing this, we do a large batch at work, and then we turn around and we freeze them. We pull them out of the freezer, put them back in the oven to refresh them and crisp them up. So if I have too much sugar in my batter, that second refresh is going to make them too dark and they're going to seem like they're burnt. So we've got the sugar, the salt in there. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the butter. Again, the recipe that you're going to get, you can use butter or vegetable oil. There's a couple of differences. You'll see that when you use the vegetable oil formula, there is less of it than there is butter. And the reason for that is because butter has about 80% fat to it and 20% water, whereas oil doesn't have any of that water, so you need 20% less. And what we're going to do is we're going to get this started, and we want to start this we want to get it kind of to a simmer, because it's very important that the butter is completely melted before the mixture comes to a boil. And the reason for that is if we have to wait for big chunks of butter to melt, we're going to get too much water evaporation coming out of that pot, and our choux is not going to come out. It's not going to come out with the right sort of volume. While we're waiting on that, give you a little bit of history. So Chef Pantarelli, he was the head chef for Catherine de Medici, is credited for being the first one to come up with pâte choux. It was 1540, so this has a really, really long history. Then in the sort of 18th century, 19th century, excuse me, that's when Antoine Carême kind of standardized it, tweaked it, and really came up with the pâte choux that we know today. So I'm just giving my pot a little bit of a stir. Again, what I'm trying to do is I want that butter to melt at the same time as it comes to a boil. I generally, if I'm going to do this, I will take my butter and leave it out at room temperature overnight. If you are using cold butter, just start it on a lower heat. Give it a little bit more time. And then once that butter's melted completely, that's when we can pump up your gas burner, your electric, whatever it is you're using, you can crank up that heat, because the next step is we want to bring that to a rolling boil. It's a very important part of this. We need enough heat for there to truly be gelatinization of those starches. So I'm almost melted, so we're going to crank this up a little bit. You can also, by the way, use 50-50 butter and oil. The oil recipe tends to make for a crisper shell. Again, when I'm doing them at work, I'm looking for something that's going to hold for a long time. I want it to be crisp. I need to fill them. I need to be able to put them in the cooler. They might have to sit there, half the day before they go out for the function at night. So I generally use that oil recipe in that case. So I have a very light boil going right now. Starting to come up. Beauty about induction burners, they go really fast. So that's very helpful to me today. And I'm not quite at a rolling boil yet. We're getting close. And for any of you who would like some more information on pâte choux, Francisco Magoya, phenomenal pastry chef, has a blog called Saint Honoré, and he does a real deep dive into pâte choux. He does a few things a little different to me, but I have a lot of techniques that I've borrowed from him. So anyhow, if you want to look that up, it's a really cool website. All right, so I have a good rolling boil. So I'm going to move my pot off the stove, and I have pre-sifted my flour. I sifted this several times. And you want to add all that flour at one time. And you're going to grab a whisk, and you're going to whisk, and you're not going to waste time, because we need to get all that flour mixed in. You don't want any dry flour lumps. Those dry flour lumps are going to create problems when you go to bake it. Those are the things that are going to, those dry flour lumps are going to end up creating blowouts. They're going to make it so that your choux doesn't expand evenly. You also need that flour. We're going to put this back on the stove. We have to get it out of the whisk, which is always a bit of a nuisance. There we go. All right. And now we're going to put it back on the stove. And this is an extremely important part of making pâte à choux. You want to continually stir it. And what we're doing is we are pre-gelatinizing that starch. We are basically doing the same thing you would be doing if you're making a roux to tighten a bechamel or something. And the process that's happening is the water and the heat are being absorbed by the flour. The starch molecules in the flour then expand and explode, releasing the starch. And that is once it releases the starch, that's what's going to tighten the entire mixture, and it's going to create the binder to hold the eggs when we mix those eggs in. So this is one of those days where you get a free workout. You just want to keep on stirring. You really want to see it. It'll kind of gather up into a bit of a ball. I don't know if you could see that through the steam, but I have a bit of a ball that's happening. And I am doing this, by the way, sort of medium heat, I would say, medium to high. Again, don't stop stirring. You want to really make sure that every single starch molecule that can open bursts open, does its job, and makes us beautiful choux pastries. All right, so one of the tricks that I learned from Chef Magoya was when you think that the dough is ready, I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for sort of a film that forms on the bottom of the pot. I don't know if you can see, again, the steam is not your friend. And then I'm also going to take a temperature on this. And what I'm looking for is I want to be between like 169, 176 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason for this is that is the temperature at which starches gelatinize. So if I get up to that temperature, I know that all of my starch has in fact gelatinized. So I'm at 173, so I'm in a good place. So next step, we're going to take all that dough, and we're going to put that directly into the pan. Don't scrape the bottom of your pot. This is that film that we were talking about. So really get kind of a nasty film. If you fill it up with water, let it sit for a while, and you'll be able to get it off. So Jackie, do we have any questions yet?
We do, of course. Yes. So
Right.
one of the questions that has come in was about your training in preparation for your role as a pastry chef. One of the students would like to know how long you attended Johnson & Wales University and any other training that you might recommend.
So I went a slightly different path. My degree is not actually in pastry. So I started out doing a culinary degree. I loved pastry, but I was a little concerned. I was like, there's not that many jobs for pastry chefs. So I didn't want to limit myself. So I said, well, I'll do a culinary degree. And I wasn't sure really, I loved being on the line. I enjoyed it. I worked in school. And then I did my externship. And during my externship, I worked in a hotel and I moved through the different departments. And once I got to the bake shop, I was like, this is it. I love this. This is definitely where I want to go. This is the career that I'm looking for. My father said to me, you need a 4-year degree. You need to get back in school. So I went back to school. I did food service management. And then when I graduated, at that point, I just simply started taking positions that were going to build on one another in the pastry world. And then also I've done lots of continuing education classes. any demos, any pastry demos. I'm an avid reader. My book collection is one of my pride and joys. Love my books. So like I said, it wasn't necessarily the most straightforward path, but it was effective and it was good for me. And I found that having that culinary background, even some of it, has been useful. I pull some of those things actually into things I do in pastry now.
Very interesting. Great advice. I have a similar experience as well. I started in a culinary program and pastry.
So, all right. So what I am going to do, we're going to take another question, but I'm going to go ahead and I am using the paddle attachment. And we are going to put this onto the mixer and we're going to allow this to run on low speed. We're going to bring the mixer over here so that everybody can see it a little bit easier. Ooh. That's okay. If I didn't knock it off the table, we're all good, right? And we just want to kind of turn this sort of low to medium speed. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for it to release some of that heat and that steam. So Jackie, what's another question?
Another question has to do with handling special diets or allergies. And they were wondering if you could use aquafaba in this recipe, or if you have any other advice when it comes to whole plant-based diets.
I have to be honest with you. I don't have a lot of experience in sort of a lot of the special diets. I've done some gluten-free work and things, but I haven't really gotten into, I've done a little bit of vegan work, but never pâte à choux. I'm sure that there are some good resources out there. I can try to take a look after, sometime after the webinar and maybe shoot Jackie some ideas. But unfortunately, I'm afraid I really can't answer that question.
No, not a problem. But there have been several questions coming in about if you have any favorite pastry books. I'm
sorry, what was the last part of that question?
Several of the viewers were wondering if you have any favorite pastry books or recommendations of books that they should read.
Oh, yes. So Andy Shalbana, he did, and for the life of me, I went at Professional Baking. I don't remember the exact name of the book, but if you look up Andy Shalbana, his book is phenomenal. Chocolate and then also Sugar by Ewald Notter are outstanding books. Francisco Magoya, his book on frozen desserts. If you're looking to do any kind of ice cream, sorbets, things like that, some really, really innovative techniques. Those are probably some major go-tos. And then for when I'm looking for something basic, I usually go to Joe Amendola's, I think it's called the Baker's Manual or the Baking Manual, and phenomenal book. I mean, that is a real, it's just got all of those have really solid formulas. They work every time. The directions are clear, they're concise. And most of those books have them set up for a commercial production kitchen. So anyway, that's just a few of them.
That's fabulous. I'm going to put the names of those in the chat for those who are tuning in.
Great. And so anyhow, so we're just letting this mix. And what I'm waiting for is I'm waiting for that batter to really drop down below about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason for the 140 degrees Fahrenheit is because that is the temperature at which eggs begin to coagulate. And we don't want to cook the eggs. We want to cook the eggs in the oven. We don't want to cook the eggs in the batter or in the bowl. If we do that, we're just going to get basically bready pastries that they're not going to be hollow. They won't be filled, because one of the unique things about pâte à choux is it is physically leavened. It's a physically leavened dough. So we have several different leavenings. We have chemical, which is going to be in things like your quick breads, contain baking soda, baking powder. You have biologically leavened. Those are going to be things like your breads with yeast. And then you have physically leavened, which is what pâte à choux is, and it is leavened by steam. So we've got a couple things that are going to contribute to that. We have the water that is trapped within the starch molecules. And then we also have the water, which is the primary component of eggs. And those, once they get into heat, this is going back to basic physics. Once a liquid becomes hot, it becomes a gas, takes up more space, and it ends up leavening your product. So, all right, you can do a couple things. You can temperature this if you want to, or the trick that I like is I put my hands on the bowl. If the bowl is too hot for me to hold my hands on, it's too hot for me to put my eggs in. If I put my hands on the bowl, I can hold them there and it just feels nice and warm. I'm good to go. I can start adding eggs. And a lot of times when I see pastry cooks first make pâte à choux in the bake shop, they add one egg and they wait for it to mix. And then they add one more egg and they wait for it to mix in. Well, if you've got a batch of pâte à choux that uses 50 eggs, you're going to be there all day. So you don't need to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add about a quarter of our eggs at one time. And we're letting that mix in. So we just let that continue to mix, and that starch is going to absorb up that egg. And once that egg has been absorbed, at that point, I will be able to add some more. You don't have to worry about scraping the bowl for your first or second addition. But after your second addition, we'll make sure to scrape the bowl, because just like with any kind of pastry product, we want to make sure that mixture is going to be homogeneous. Homogeneous, just simply a fancy way of saying we want it to be completely mixed through and none of the singular parts. Okay, so what I have here is the eggs have completely mixed in. Whoops. So we're going to turn the mixer back on. And I'm doing this sort of, again, low, medium speed. And I'm going to add, I'm doing a small batch. So I'm probably adding about a third of my eggs at a time. You want to add those eggs in 3 to 4 batches. Depends on how much you're making at one time. So we're just going to let that mix in, because right now it just looks like kind of a sloppy mess. Hopefully you all can see that. Definitely, it's bits of dough floating around in slimy egg. Not very appetizing yet. All right. Thankfully, this goes pretty quickly. Jackie, do we have another question?
Of course, yes, plenty of questions. Let me see. Do you have a signature dish or favorite pastry dish, and where do you find inspiration for your new menu items?
Ooh, signature dish. As of recently, I've kind of become known for my cakes, which is ironic because it's not really it's not really my favorite thing to do. But we do a lot of weddings at the driving club. So I do a lot of wedding cakes, a lot of groom's cakes. So most of my Instagram feed is going to be cakes. I thoroughly enjoy doing plated desserts because there's usually a variety of components. It's very artistic. I can also play with flavor profiles. And then as far as inspiration goes, it comes from all over the place. Sometimes it can be a technique that I've seen somebody do. It may be a picture of something somebody else has done. And I think, oh man, what a cool shape. What a cool idea. I wonder if I could do something like it. One of the things I never want to do is I don't want to copy somebody else's work. But you know, I believe that everything that's been done has been done before. So, I mean, I don't mind, you know, I have no problem with taking like an element or an idea from one. Maybe it's, you know, this idea from somebody else, or, you know, we taste it and we think, you know what, this is lacking sort of a crunchy element. You know, what can I add? And then sometimes the inspiration is going to be the ingredient. And that's some of the work that I do with the Caliber chocolate as an ambassador is I will be given an ingredient, chocolate, and asked to develop something with that. And so at that point, that item becomes my inspiration. You know, seasonal fruits, even vegetables are great inspirations. So I'm going to show everybody the dough. We've got, we're starting to get everything mixed in, and it's starting to look like we got a really nice batter going. It's kind of shiny. And this is the point at which I want to go ahead and scrape that again. I said you could wait, you know, until your second edition was in, but then that's the time we need to go ahead and scrape that bowl, scrape off the paddle, because this stuff loves to crawl up to the top of the paddle. And make sure anytime you're scraping, particularly in pastry, my staff is so tired of hearing me go, scrape the bowl, scrape the bowl. And the reason why is you want to make sure that you get all the way down to the bottom. You want to make sure that everything is mixed in. Again, we talked about how if you don't get those starch granules completely cooked, evenly cooked, that they're going to create blowouts and problems for you. Same thing happens with the same thing happens if you have lumps of dough that don't have the same amount of egg mixed in. So I'm getting pretty close. I've got this shiny batter. So I'm going to hold back one of my eggs. And depending on how much moisture came out when you were cooking your batter, that'll determine how much egg this is going to take. And I learned a really interesting tip recently. And it said that if your batter is too thick after you finish adding the amount of eggs in the recipe, that you should then add warm water, because what you are trying to fix is not the protein content of the recipe, which is what your eggs are affecting, the protein and the fat content. You're actually trying to affect the amount of water evaporation that happened. So in adding extra eggs, which a lot of chefs, and I mean, it works, it's not wrong, but it, from a science standpoint, adding water to get your dough to the right consistency once all of your eggs are added is going to fix what you're trying to adjust for. So I've got this beautiful shiny batter now, and I'm going to check for something that we call a bird's beak. And I have to be honest with you, it took me forever to figure out what people were talking about. But what they're talking about is, do you see that point? Looks like a bird's beak. It's kind of skinny at the bottom. It's kind of fat at the top. This is how I know that I have the right amount of egg in there. My batter is also holding its shape. It's not so loose that it's slacking. And what that means is I'm going to be able to pipe this nicely, and it's going to hold the shape that I pipe. So, all right, Jackie, on to another question.
Fabulous. Okay. One of the questions was about the recipe. Several of the viewers were wondering, what type of flour do you recommend for your pâte à choux? Is it AP or bread or other?
So what's interesting about pâte à choux is there's only a few ingredients. Every single little adjustment you make to the ingredient changes the outcome. And you can use every single flour out there. You can use pastry flour, cake flour, AP flour, bread flour. Each one is going to change it slightly. I use bread flour, and again, the reason why I'm using bread flour is it gives me a slightly thicker crust and a stronger form. I am making these, where I'm not necessarily going to use them the same day. We're going to take them, we bake them, we cool them, we put them in a bag, and we freeze them. They then have to come out of the freezer. We refresh them in a 350-degree oven for like 2-3 minutes just to crisp them up. And it needs to be strong enough that it can handle all of that. If I make it with cake flour, they're a little bit more tender. The shell is a little bit thinner. It just can't take quite as much abuse. So whatever flour you got, if you have flour, eggs, water, and salt, you can make pot au choux today. And butter. Sorry, you have to have fat, vegetable oil or butter. Okie dokie. So now we're going to talk about filling a pastry bag real quick. So I have a pastry bag here, and I have just a plain tip. This is going to be for my cream puffs. And what you want to do is you want to fold the bag over your hand. So what you basically have is a Muppet. I wish I could do ventriloquism right now. But anyway, you're going to hold it open with your hand. And then I'm going to take that batter. I'm going to spoon it in. I'm going to use my hand to just kind of wipe off my spatula. It's nice, clean. Fill the bag about max, I would say about halfway. And then you just want to push that batter down, twist it, and clean off the edge. All right, my bag is ready to go. All right, so for our next trick, we are going to, I'm going to show you how to, you're going to put just a little tiny dab of batter in each corner underneath your parchment paper. You can do this on a silpat, you can do it on a greased pan, any of those things will work. And we're just going to stick that paper to the pan. And that's going to make it much easier when I'm trying to pipe. So when we're piping profiteroles, something to remember is you want to same size, same pan. You don't want to put long éclairs that are going to take longer to bake on the same pan as you have little tiny profiteroles. They're going to bake at different speeds. So remember, same size, same pan. Same goes for cookies, by the way. So what we're going to do, we're going to put that bag straight down and we're going to start squeezing. And when we get to the size we want, you're going to stop squeezing completely and kind of twist off. Okay. And you want to make sure that you have enough space that these can be about twice as large once they're baked.
Chef, it's Matt, real quick, the producer. I'm just going to request, Kim, we've got your finger covering part of the camera, so I just want to be aware of that.
Bad.
No problem.
So sorry.
As you can
Thank
tell, we are not professionals at this. Baking, yes. Camera, Zoom, not so much. Thank you, Matt. So just simply.
Kim, your finger's back.
Okay.
It's on the right-hand side, so we want to make sure that your finger's not covering the camera there. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we have, you can see there's some little tails right here. So one of the things I also like to do before I bake my choux is I pan spray, a nice little coating of pan spray. And what that's going to do is it's going to slow down the development of the crust. It's just like bread. If I can slow down how fast that crust forms, my choux can get bigger than if my crust forms and holds it down. This is also a good time. You can just use your finger. You can fix that little tail that comes up. And one of the other recipes I have given you is for something called crackling. So it's basically a little bit, it's some flour, sugar, brown sugar, butter, and you simply roll it out. You can roll it out in between 2 sheets of parchment, 2 sheets of acetate. I think my directions say to roll it between a silpat and a sheet of paper on top. I do, when I'm rolling it, I do have to occasionally peel the paper back, because you will get parchment paper will leave these lines when you're trying to get it thin, because you need to get that down to about 1/8 of an inch. It's pretty thin when you're working with it. And then you just stack these sheets up and throw them in the freezer, and then they're ready when you want. The basic recipe comes out light brown. You can use food coloring, you can use beet powder, natural coloring, matcha tea, just simply, if you've got something dry like cocoa powder, matcha, just remove that much flour, as much flour as you add of that ingredient, because otherwise you throw off the dry fat ratio. And in this one, I just used a little bit of pink food coloring. I wanted you all to be able to see it on camera. But when you've mixed it, it just kind of looks like Play-Doh. It's kind of grainy Play-Doh. Keeps for months and months in the freezer. But it's kind of fun, and it does some really nice things. It gives you this lovely crunchy, crackly shell. And what I've done is I've just cut it out with a cutter that's about the same size as my cream puff that I piped. And remember that whatever shape you pipe is the shape it's going to bake. So if you have strange looking teardrops, if you have ovals, that's not going to magically fix itself in the oven. Choux is a great way to practice piping, that's for sure. So you simply would top them with the choux. You would top your choux with the crackling. You can cut rectangles if you want to put it on top of eclairs. And then we're going to pop that into the oven, and I'm going to pipe some eclairs for you. I am putting that into a 375-degree oven. There are recipes that say start at 350. It works. I find that starting it at 375 gives me more of a puff. It gives you that higher heat, gets that steam going, you get that expansion, and you really want to be kind of careful not to mess with it. So you're going to let it puff up, and once you see that it's puffed, don't open the door. Just turn your oven down to 350, and it isn't until you get a really nice golden color on it before you want to open that door. If you open it prematurely, that structure hasn't set. Your steam inside the puff is going to rapidly cool down, and it's going to sink. So, all right, let's pipe some eclairs. So one of the tricks for getting nice, clean looking eclairs that puff evenly is to use what I call a French star tip. That's kind of a big open tip. It's got a little tiny teeth. You can do it with a plain tip. It'll work. This definitely makes for, it seems to rise more evenly. I don't get as many interesting odd shapes. And then what you want to do is you want to pipe a straight line. If you need them to be even, you can put a sheet of parchment paper underneath. With a marker, you have just drawn lines that are the size you want. And then you would pipe, and you would pull that sheet with your lines out from underneath. And that way, when you put them in the oven, they're all even. But what I want to do is my piping bag is at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm just going to try to use very even pressure. When I get to the end of the length I want, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop squeezing. I'm going to pull a little bit and then pull back. Again, so we're going to 45-degree angle, even pressure, stop, pull back, and back up again. Stop, pull, snap back. Okay. And that way I don't have big waggly tails, because I don't want those. Those are going to burn before the rest of my shell is evenly cooked. Another technique that you can do is you can sift powdered sugar on top of them before putting them in the oven. And that will provide the same thing as the pan spray did. It's going to help slow down the speed at which the crust sets, allows for maximum expansion. And again, this is also a great opportunity to go ahead and tap those tails down, make sure that I'm nice and even. And then I'll pop those in the oven and bake them just like the other ones. One of the things you want to make sure, don't necessarily take off, like if you have some that are not perfect, don't necessarily take them off your pan. go ahead and leave them on, because what you want to be able to do when you pull those out of the oven, when you think they're done, is you want to be able to break one open. Those are your sacrificial ones. Those are the ones you can break open so we can look and see and make sure that the inside of it is not eggy. All right, so I have some examples. Magic of television. We have a couple different varieties. We have choux that is done with the crackling. And what is interesting is these were piped at the same time, same size as these over here. But with the crackling, it helps inhibit that crust from forming, and they get bigger. And for whatever reason, they stay much rounder. You get a really nice puff on these. Whereas you get a little bit more of, you can see why this is called pate choux. Choux is cabbage in French, which is where the name came from. And these are a little bit more cabbage looking. We have our éclairs. So I want to talk briefly about filling pastries, filling éclairs. Because what you have here, you've got a very neutral item. It tastes a little bit of egg. It's pleasant. I mean, it tastes good, but it's not something you would serve on its own. It's the filling that makes a choux pastry. And so one of my favorite tools is a chopstick. And what I want to do is I'm going to take that chopstick. I'm going to go into the end of one of my éclairs. And I'm basically going to work it through kind of carefully until I get a hole on the other side. Now I have an éclair kebab. Remove that. And this is a basic pastry cream. You'll be getting the recipe for that as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just push my tip in there, and I'm going to start squeezing. And I'm going to start squeeze. Whoops! I have a hole. I have a blowout here. That's okay, because you know what? He's going to be for a snack for later. Let's get another one. Hopefully this one won't have a crack in it. I made these yesterday, and I quickly wrapped them up, and I brought them home. So they've been a little bit abused at this point. All right. So, all right. Yep, there we go. Made my kebab. And if you have trouble when you're filling, with the tip pushing back into the bag, I usually don't have a big issue. But if you do, you can always take a little piece of tape and actually tape the top of the bag and the tip together, and then the tip won't push back in. Thank you, Francisco, for that handy tip. All right, so what I'm doing is I put my tip in the hole, and now I am squeezing, squeezing, squeezing. And I am waiting until I start to see it pop out the other side. Peekaboo! All right, now I know that my éclair is full. The other thing is it feels heavy, and it now has some weight to it. So if you don't have any, if you filled it up and you think you're full and it still feels really nice and light, you don't have enough filling in there. Go again. Another technique for making sure that they're filled all the way is you can use a pastry tip. Again, I like my handy dandy chopstick. Make about 3 holes. We're gonna get that custard. We're gonna get that tip in there. Let's start to squeeze. And I'm squeezing until I can see it come out of one of the other holes. Peekaboo. Gonna go into the other one. Whoop. And he is gonna. You want your hole, by the way, to be big enough to actually get the tip inside. That would help. You should have grabbed a smaller tip. All right, filling it up. Okay, it's nice and full. And then simply going to wipe off my excess. And you would simply continue that process. You can either cut it in half, or you can do, again, the same thing that we just talked about. Put a hole in the bottom. Just remember, you always want your product once it has the filling inside, and you can fill it with pastry cream, cremeux, ganache. I mean, whatever you can imagine. That's what innovation is all about. So, Jackie, do we have another question? Maybe, maybe not. We'll get back to that. So we're going to talk a little bit about finishing. I do need to warm up my ganache. I provided you with a recipe for ganache as well. This is a basic dark chocolate ganache. It's couverture, so it's dark chocolate that has at least 32% cocoa butter in it. Cocoa solids. It has a little bit of glucose and heavy cream. And the directions and everything are in your recipe. If you've made it right, it'll set up and it'll crystallize and it'll get thicker, which is what we want. To soften it so that we can go ahead and dip our éclairs, you just want to warm it up slightly. You want to be careful not to get it too hot, or it will in fact split. Ganache is it's a pretty fragile emulsion of fat in water. It's the chemistry behind ganache is pretty cool. A lot of people will dip their éclairs in glazing fondant. You'll also see people who will do it in like coating chocolate or even tempered couverture. I mean, there's really no wrong answers. This is where innovation comes into play. And so what we're going to do, we're going to take and clean up a little bit because I have a mess going on here. You always want to clean as you go. So we're going to take our éclair. Now remember, ready to eat food, so we want to make sure that we are wearing gloves. And what we're going to do, we're going to dip that éclair in the ganache. You want a container that's big enough for you to be able to dip, and then we're going to pick it up. Do you see that shine? Yeah, that's what we're going for. I'm going to set that down. I want to be kind of careful not to mar it. If I have drips, I can just take my finger, just kind of clean that up a little bit. If you find it's dripping a lot for you, just wait, let that ganache cool down a little bit. And I have just some little caramelized cocoa nibs I'm going to sprinkle on top. And we look like we are just about out of time. So I want to quickly run down just a few of the things that you can do with your pâte à choux now that you know how to make it. You can make éclairs, cream puffs, profiteroles, classic dessert. Cut that open, little ice cream in there, some chocolate sauce on top. Oh yeah. Paris Beret, that is a classical dessert. It's a ring of choux paste, and it was actually made to commemorate a bicycle race from Paris to Bray in France. And so that's where that circular comes from. It's normally filled with hazelnut praline pastry cream. You have Saint Honoré, which is a torte, classical torte, puff pastry, circle of pâte à choux. It's filled with diplomat cream, and then it is garnished, it's topped with whipped cream, and then it's garnished with profiteroles that are filled with pastry cream and dipped in caramelized sugar. You have croquembouches, which is traditional wedding cake. That's cream puffs filled with pastry cream, dipped in caramel, and then built up to make this beautiful tall tower. You can make churros. You can pipe it into hot fat. One of the tricks I was going to show you, but we're kind of out of time, is when you're doing churros, hold the piping bag. I hold the piping bag in my left dominant hand, my less dominant hand. I pipe it into the hot fat, and then I use my scissors to cut it off. I pan spray my scissors, and I just use my scissors to cut it off at the same length. And it works real well. And with the pan spray and the scissors, makes it easy because I can just use one hand. With your ganache recipe, there's also a variation on there for chocolate sauce. So you got something to dip your churros in. Again, more of the amazing things that Pate will do. Parisian gnocchi piped into simmering water. You can make gougères. Those have Gruyere cheese in them. Bake them off like you would a regular cream puff. Wonderful little hors d'oeuvre, little snack. I feel like Cookie Monster every time we make those at work, because I literally want to flip the top of my head back and just start shoveling them in. You can do pomme dauphine or pomme de terre lorette, which is where pate choux is added into mashed potato. And then you put spoonfuls of that or scoops of that into the fryer, fry it up. And anyhow, it goes on and on. Hors d'oeuvres, swans, rigelous, chouquette, zeppoli de San Giuseppe, Marillenknödel. So go out there and make some choux.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Chef, for sharing. Do you mind if we ask you just a couple of questions that
I would love it. Please do.
All right. I know we won't be able to get to everyone's questions, but I think that just spells that the conversation hopefully will continue with other presentations. So one of the questions that came in was, if you did add that extra egg and the batter was then too loose, is there any way to fix that?
So the only way to fix it is to make a whole nother batch with less egg in it and then mix the two of them together.
Right.
If you're not prepared to make a whole nother batch, throw it out and start over. I mean, you're really just talking about eggs, water, salt, butter. You're not talking about your super high-end ingredients.
All right. Thank you so much. Now, and besides your chopstick, do you have any favorite pieces of pastry equipment or a favorite?
My hands down favorite pastry equipment is my hands. I use my hands to scrape the bowl. We talked about that. It's my thing. Scrape that bowl. Yeah, definitely. I would say my hands. Bowl scrapers. Bowl scrapers are awesome things. I have hundreds of them floating around. I have them at home. I have them at work. They're in my pocket.
They're in her car.
Yeah, and then offset spatula would be my other one.
Excellent. All right. And do you have a proudest pastry moment that you might be able to share with the viewers?
Ooh, yes, it was competing. I think it was 2007 for the National Pastry Chef of the Year at the ACF National Convention. That was it was grueling, but it was probably one of the most amazing things I've ever tried. And you know, if you don't go for it, you don't get it. So it was a great moment.
Wonderful. All right. And so since we do have a lot of emerging chefs and culinary students also tuning in today, you know, I'm wondering if you might be willing to share what your first job in food service was, so that
yes,
see how far you've come.
Oh my God. So my very first job in food service was working at the BK Lounge, otherwise known as Burger King. I wanted to work. I think I was 15 years old. I was just finally to a point where I was allowed to be hired by somebody. And it was within, my mother's deal was it had to be within walking distance of the house because there was no way she was driving me. And it was the closest thing. So yeah, I started the BK Lounge.
All right. Well, I love it. I'm sure you learned many food service lessons there, and it obviously inspired you to continue with your culinary training.
I did.
What advice might you have for some of the emerging chefs or pastry chefs who are tuning in today?
Hone your craft. take your time. It is not about the title. You know, there are so many places now that hire people. They have one person in the kitchen does pastry and they call them the pastry chef. I mean, that's simply a title. It can be whatever you want. But when you're working by yourself, you may have the title, but if you're not working for somebody who can teach you something, you've basically stopped your learning curve. Seek out those people you want to work, who you are inspired by, and try to work with them, stage with them, talk to them. I mean, most of us are very open. I mean, I always say that pastry chefs are some of the most open, giving people there are. We will share recipes, we will share techniques, we will troubleshoot. So those resources are out there, but take your time, hone your craft, learn how to pipe, learn how to make pâte à choux, learn how to make a perfect pastry cream, because all those fancy things you see are built on those fundamentals. And if you don't have those fundamentals down 100%, you cannot expect that final finished product to be as good as it can possibly be.
Very inspiring. Any final words or final thoughts that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Just, I mean, this is an amazing career. It can take you around the world. There's so many opportunities. If you have a passion for this, you know, feed it, read, look at pictures, go to demos, eat out, do whatever you can to feed that passion, and it will take you into amazing places in your life.
I love it. Feed the passion. Well, that's fabulous. Thank you so much, Chef, and a huge virtual round of applause as we all thank Chef Capper.
And thank you to everybody.
Well, thank you. And such an insightful and delicious presentation. I wish I could be there right now, but we are so appreciative of you sharing today with the culinary professionals and emerging professionals. ACF wants to hear from all of you, so be on the lookout for a survey tomorrow that you will receive along with Chef Capper's recipes and the video recording of this session. We are excited to offer you more, and as we just said, I think there's a lot more that we need to cover when it comes to pastry skills. But if you're interested in attending our next webinar, please on June 2nd, we will learn how to butcher American lamb. So for inspiration, for culinary news, to register for upcoming webinars, please check out our website, wearechefs.com. On behalf of ACF and the ACF National Office, thank you again to Chef Capper for this opportunity, and thank you for joining us today. We'll see you soon at ACF National Convention this summer in Orlando. Carla Hall, Art Smith, dozens of other chefs will be presenting. And our own ACF Young Chefs Club president, Chef Ashton, will also be there and competing. So you don't want to miss this year's convention. We'll have the opportunity to ignite your